Hello again. Now, I've got something new to show you today. This is a rather snazzy fixed blade razor by Kym Mathias of KM Designs. Now, I don't know how much detail this camera is going to pick up. There is a rather elegant engraving there of his logo on the blade, and it is really well done, really faultless. I hate sounding sycophantic, but it really is a beautiful job. Now, the issue is, of course, it's got no scales, so I'm terrified in case I drop it into the sink and chip the blade. But I suspect there's a nice thumb grip just there. So I suspect that it might be psychological, and once I start using it, there might be no difference. That's what I'm hoping anyway. We'll find out. I think it's one of those deals like when you borrow a car and the dealer says to you, if you bend it, then you buy it. So, if I like it, I might tell him that I dropped it into the sink and chipped the blade, so I've got to buy it. But that would be a bit, dodgy. So we'll see how it goes. There are another couple of guys after me waiting their turn to try the blade, so it might be a bit unkind to do that. But just by going by the looks of the blade and the feel and the weight and everything, I'd certainly like to own one of those. We'll see how I get on with it. And as it's almost Christmas, I thought I would listen to some Charles Dickens. Just give me a second, I'll cue up the Charles Dickens and we'll get going. Right.
Chapter 1 of Oliver Twist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Chapter 1 treats of the place where Oliver Twist was born and of the circumstances attending his birth. Among other public buildings in a certain town, which for many reasons it would be prudent to refrain from mentioning, and to which I will assign no fictitious name, there is one anciently common to most towns, great or small, to wit, a workhouse. And in this workhouse was born, on a day and date which I need not trouble myself to repeat, inasmuch it can be of no possible consequence to the reader, in this stage of the business at all events, the item of mortality whose name is prefixed to the head of this chapter. For a long time after it was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble by the parish surgeon, it remained a matter of considerable doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all, in which case it is somewhat more than probable that these memoirs would never have appeared, or if they had, being comprised within a couple of pages, they would have possessed the inestimable merit of being the most concise and faithful specimen of biography extant in the literature of any age or country. Although I am not disposed to maintain that the being born in a workhouse is in itself the most fortunate and enviable circumstance that can possibly befall a human being, I do mean to say that in this particular instance it was the best thing for Oliver Twist that could by possibility have occurred. The fact is that there was considerable difficulty in inducing Oliver to take upon himself the office of respiration, a troublesome practice, but one which custom was rendered necessary to our easy existence, and for some time he lay gasping on a little flock mattress, rather unequally poised between this world and the next, the balance being decidedly in favour of the latter. Now, if during this brief period Oliver had been surrounded by careful grandmothers, anxious aunts, experienced nurses, and doctors of profound wisdom, he would have most inevitably and indubitably have been killed in no time. There being nobody by, however, but a pauper old woman, who was rendered rather misty by an unwanted allowance of beer, and a parish surgeon, who did such matters by contract, Oliver and nature fought out the point between them. The result was that after a few struggles, Oliver breathed, sneezed, and proceeded to advertise to the inmates of the workhouse the fact of a new burden having been imposed upon the parish, by setting up as loud a cry as could reasonably have been expected from a male infant who had not been possessed of that very useful appendage, a voice, for much longer space of time than 3 minutes and a quarter. As Oliver gave this first proof of free and proper action of his lungs, the patchwork coverlet which was carelessly flung over the iron bedstead rustled, but the pale face of a young woman was raised feebly from the pillow, and a faint voice imperfectly articulated the words, "Let me see the child and die." The surgeon, who had been sitting with his face turned towards the fire, giving the palms of his hands a warm rub alternately. As the young woman spoke, he rose and, advancing to the bed's head, said with more kindness than might have been expected of him, "Oh, you must not talk about dying yet." "Lord bless her dear aunt, no," interposed the nurse, she hastily depositing in her pocket a green glass bottle, the contents of which she had been tasting in a corner with evident satisfaction. "Lord bless her dear aunt, when she has lived as long as I have, sir, and had 13 children of her own, and all of them dead except 2, and then being a workless with me, she'll know better than to take on in that way, bless her dear heart. Think what it is to be a mother, there's a dear young lamb, do." Apparently, this consolatory perspective of a mother's prospects failed in producing its due effect. The patient shook her head, stretched out her hand towards the child. The surgeon deposited it in her arms. She imprinted her cold white lips passionately on its forehead, passed her hands over her face, gazed wildly around, shuddered, fell back, and died. They chafed her breast, hands, and temples, but the blood had stopped forever. They talked of hope and comfort. They had been strangers too long. "It's all over, Mrs. Thingummy," said the surgeon at last. "Ah, so it is, dear, so it is," said the nurse, picking up a cork of green bottle, which had fallen out on the pillow as she stooped to take up the child. "Poor dear. You needn't mind sending up to me if the child cries, nurse," said the surgeon, putting on his gloves with great deliberation. "It's very likely it will be troublesome. Give it a little gruel if it is." He put on his hat and, pausing by the bedside on his way to the door, added, "She's a good-looking girl, too. Where does she come from?" "She was brought here last night," replied the old woman, "by the overseer's order. She was found lying in the street. She had walked some distance, for her shoes were worn to pieces. But where she come from, or where she was going to, nobody knows." The surgeon leaned over the body and raised the left hand. "The old story," he said, shaking his head. "No wedding ring, I see. Good night." The medical gentleman walked away to dinner, and the nurse, having once more applied herself to the green bottle, sat down on a low chair before the fire and proceeded to dress the infant. What an excellent example of the power of dress young Oliver Twist was. Wrapped in the blanket which had hitherto formed his only covering, he might have been the child of a nobleman or a beggar. It would have been hard for the haughtiest stranger to have assigned him his proper station in society. But now that he was enveloped in the old calico robes which had grown yellow in the same service, he was badged and ticketed, and fell into his place at once, a parish child, the orphan of a workhouse, the humble, half-starved drudge, to be cuffed and buffeted through the world, despised by all and pitied by none. Oliver cried lustily. If he could have known that he was an orphan left to the tender mercies of churchwardens and overseers, perhaps he would have cried the louder. End of chapter 1.
Well, what I can tell you so far, it feels okay in my right hand, but I'm a bit... what's the word? I'm not quite so confident in the left hand. It just feels... I don't know. But it's a really hefty blade, which I like. I think I'm quite lucky because I've got it newly honed. It's been passed around a few guys and then it went back to Kym to get honed again before I got it, so I've got it more or less fresh. But I certainly don't think it would take long to get accustomed to it. It just feels... I don't know, it's maybe actually just the weight and the dimensions of the blade and not the fact that it doesn't have any scales. Yeah, it's a bit strange changing to the left hand. It's a really close shave. I expected that, but yeah, I think a week or so of using this every day and it would be no problem. Right, just let me see if I can queue up chapter 2.
Chapter 2 of Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2 treats of Oliver Twist's growth, education and board. For the next 8 or 10 months, Oliver was the victim of a systematic course of treachery and deception. He was brought up by hand. The hungry and destitute situation of the infant orphan was duly reported by the workhouse authorities to the parish authorities. The parish authorities acquired with dignity of the workhouse authorities whether there was no female then domiciled in the house who was in a situation to impart to Oliver Twist the consolation and nourishment of which he stood in need. The workhouse authorities replied with humility that there was not. Upon this, the parish authorities magnanimously and humanely resolved that Oliver should be farmed or in other words, that he should be dispatched to a branch workhouse some 3 miles off, where 20 or 30 other juvenile offenders, against the poor laws, rolled about the floor all day without the inconvenience of too much food or too much clothing, under the parental superintendence of an elderly female who received the culprits at and for the consideration of 7 pence halfpenny per small head per week. The 7 pence halfpenny's worth per week is a good round diet for a child. A great deal may be got for 7 pence halfpenny, quite enough to overload its stomach and make it uncomfortable. The elderly female was a woman of wisdom and experience. She knew what was good for children. She had a very accurate perception of what was good for herself. So she appropriated the greater part of the weekly stipend to her own use and consigned the rising parochial generation to an even shorter allowance than was originally provided for them, thereby finding in the lowest depth a deeper still and proving herself a very great experimental philosopher. Everybody knows the story of another experimental philosopher who had a great theory about a horse being able to live without eating, and who demonstrated it so well that he got his own horse down to a straw a day, and would unquestionably have rendered him very spirited and rampacious an animal on nothing at all, if he had not died 4 and 20 hours before he was to have his first comfortable bait of air. Unfortunately for the experimental philosophy of the female, to whose protecting care Oliver Twist was delivered over, a similar result usually attended the operation of her system. For at the very moment when the child had contrived to exist upon the smallest possible portion of the weakest possible food, it did perversely happen in 8.5 cases out of 10, either that it sickened from want and cold, or fell into the fire from neglect, or got half smothered by accident, in any one of which cases the miserable little being was usually summoned into another world, and there gathered to the fathers it had never known in this. Occasionally, when there was some more than usually interesting inquest upon a parish child that had been overlooked in turning up a bedstead, or inadvertently scalded to death when there happened to be a washing, though the latter accident was very scarce, if anything approaching to a washing being of a rare occurrence in the farm, the jury would take it into their heads to ask troublesome questions, while the parishioners would rebelliously affix their signatures to a remonstrance. These impertinences were speedily checked by the evidence of the surgeon and the testimony of the beadle, the former of whom would always open the body and found nothing inside, which is very probable indeed, and the latter of whom invariably swore whatever the parish wanted, which was very self-devotional. Besides, the board made periodical pilgrimages to the farm and always sent the beadle the day before to say they were going. The children were neat and clean to behold when they went, and what more would the people have? It cannot be expected that this system of farming would produce any very extraordinary or luxuriant crop. Oliver Twist's 9th birthday found him a pale, thin child, somewhat diminutive in stature and decidedly small in circumference. But nature, or inheritance, had implanted a good sturdy spirit in Oliver's breast. It had plenty of room to expand, thanks to the spare diet of the establishment. Perhaps to this circumstance may be attributed his having any 9th birthday.
Okay.
But this as it may, however, was his 9th birthday, and he was keeping it in the coal cellar with a select party.
Right. So that was quite enjoyable. Today is Wednesday, so I might have another shave with this on Friday, and then I'll post it to the next guy on Monday. I'll get to the post office on Monday. So whoever's next on the list, I shall post it on Monday. But I think obviously Christmas and COVID and everything, I don't know when you'll get it, but it'll be on its way. Now, where's the Henry Cooper? There we go. Why not?